Today's episode of True Crime with Kendall Ray is brought to you by Trainwell, and thanks to their support and support from viewers like you, today I'm able to make a donation to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Trainwell offers virtual personal training and customizes guided workouts to your goals, schedule, and injuries. You can work out anywhere, anytime. It doesn't matter what level you're at, where you're starting, if you're just a beginner, or if you want to improve what you're already doing. When I first started working out, I didn't know what I was doing, especially when it came to lifting, and I knew that my form was probably not right, but I didn't want to take the time to go and get a personal trainer because I'm so busy. I started out with a video consultation where we went over my goals and what I'm looking for. And so I was able to record myself lifting, send it to my trainer, and she was able to give me feedback on my form, which was huge for me. And that's what I love about it too, is I can communicate with my trainer at any time. It's easy to do so right through the app. Just to give you an example of what my workouts look like, it's all, planned out for what I'm going to be doing. And then I'm able to actually see the move that I'm supposed to be doing. And I go through it step by step. And as I go, if I have any questions or if I have feedback after the workout, I can submit that all through the app. Sometimes the days of the week that I work out change based on what I have going on. So I'll just message my trainer in the beginning of the week and say, hey, I'm actually going to move my workouts to Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever it is. And she can rearrange them for me. She checks in on how it went. It's just such a personalized experience. Some of you may have heard of Co-Pilot before. That actually was their name at one point. They have now rebranded as Trainwell. So if you would like to get started with your own personal trainer, you can actually get 14 days for free when you use my Trainwell, formerly Co-Pilot link. That is go.trainwell.net/Kendall Ray for 14 days for free. It's really a great deal. So check it out. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to True Crime with Kendall Ray. I am so happy to have you here today. And if you're new, then welcome. Also happy to have you as well. And be sure to click subscribe so that you never miss an upload from me. So guys, today I have a case for you that is very, very recent. It's still really unfolding. I had heard quite a bit about it over the last few months. I hadn't really looked into all the details, and I've got to say, once I did, I was pretty mind blown. It has to be up there with one of the craziest cases that I have ever covered. And I really decided to cover it last week when I had the amazing opportunity to have Brian Entin fly into Denver and record with me and my husband on our podcast, Mile Higher. We did a great interview with him if you would like to check that out. If you're not familiar with Brian, he is a correspondent for News Nation. He does a fantastic job, truly passionate about the cases that he covers, and he's such an interesting, down-to-earth person. So definitely check out his interview. But when we were just chatting before recording, he told me I have got to look into this case. And I'm glad I did because, yeah, it's truly unbelievable. This case has been largely referred to by the media and online as the Kansas Moms murders, also the God's Misfits murders. There's kind of this bizarre connection to a cult, which I think, honestly, more has been made of the cult element than there is actually connection to it, which I will explain. It all probably sounds really confusing. But these two Kansas moms that we're going to be talking about are Veronica Butler and Jilian Kelley. Brian Entin has been covering the case since the story first broke earlier this year, and his coverage has been excellent. So big shout out for Brian. I definitely used him and News Nation as a source for this. And with that being said, I also want to say that with this case, especially when there's a lot of details that are not public yet, obviously a lot of misinformation ends up going around. So I'm going to really try my best to stay out of the more salacious details, unconfirmed details, and straight up misinformation, and stick to the facts as best as we can with what we know at this point, which there's still going to be a lot more coming out. This is everything we know as of the day that I am uploading this episode, but this case just happened in March of 2024, so extremely recent, and still has to go through trial and all of that, all the litigation. So yeah, much more information will be coming out later on. But that being said, with this being a breaking story that is so recent, there is a lot of information to go over. So I don't want to waste any more time. Let's go ahead and jump in talking about the victims in this case, starting with Veronica. Veronica Claire Butler was born on February 28th, 1997 to her parents Clinton and Amanda in Guyman, Oklahoma. Her parents did split up and each remarried, but they stayed in the area of Guyman, which is where Veronica was raised and went to school. And she actually graduated as valedictorian from Yarborough High School. And at the time of her murder, she was attending Seward County Community College, which is about an hour away in Liberal, Kansas, where she was studying to become a surgical technologist. Now, those who knew and loved Veronica describe her as a compassionate soul, and that her kindness towards others is what they say really defines her best of all. At the time of her murder, she is said to have been working as a certified nursing assistant and devoted herself to helping aid residents in several nursing homes. On top of that, she was also known for being an incredible cook. I hear that she made amazing biscuits and gravy, and that she really picked up her passion from cooking from her mother, who taught her everything she knew when it came to cooking. But above all else, her loved ones say that Veronica's biggest passion in life was being a mother to her 2 kids. Although her kids' father, Wrangler, definitely has a different story when it comes to how she was as a mother. Now, before I get into this next chunk of information, I just wanted to preface it by saying, normally, I don't like to share information that paints victims in a negative light because they're no longer here to defend themselves. A lot of the time, that information can't be confirmed, and oftentimes it doesn't even pertain to the case. But this case is different. There is information that is upsetting about Veronica, unflattering. It definitely paints her in a bad light, and I want to report it because it is coming from court documents. A lot of it's coming from Wrangler. And, you know, at the end of the day, what you make of her as a mother and who she was as a person is your own opinion. And I'm just here to share the facts. Also, no matter what, Veronica did not deserve to be murdered. And from what I understand, she was trying to turn her life around, which I will explain a little bit more as we go through here. But yeah, just keep that in mind as we head into this next section. So the kid's father, Wrangler Rickman. Yes, pretty fun name to say, Wrangler Rickman. But anyway, he and Veronica did not have a good relationship, to say the least, and you'll be able to tell that very easily as we go through things here. The 2 of them were never married, and their relationship was very toxic, very on and off again, and yeah, at the time of her murder, it was in a really bad place. And when the 2 of them eventually did split up for good, at first they seemed to have a custody agreement that worked for everyone, that everyone was okay with as far as I understand. At first being the key word there, though. Wrangler filed for joint custody in February of 2019 with Veronica named as the primary custodial parent. With this agreement, Veronica had the kids primarily in her care, but Wrangler was able to have scheduled visitation with them. But eventually, they decided to split custody 50-50, and so the kids would spend a week with Veronica and then a week with Wrangler. However, later that summer, Veronica made the decision to move to Colorado with the kids. And she did this without the court's approval, which is a big no. And she also didn't even give notice to Wrangler. Then over the course of the next 2 years, Veronica moved the kids 4 different times between 3 different states, which is a lot for young children. And according to Wrangler, the kids always returned to his care hungry, bedwetting, and not wanting to return back to the custody of their mom. And of course, that is coming from him. So in June of 2020, he asked the courts to be granted primary physical custody, citing what Veronica had allegedly been doing to them. And in a trial in early 2021, Wrangler presented multiple witnesses who could testify to Veronica being an unstable and reckless parent, including a CPS worker who testified that Veronica had made multiple unsubstantiated claims against Wrangler, abusing the children. She basically would report Wrangler to CPS saying that he was physically harming the children, but every time the claims were looked into, there was no evidence to back it, which of course doesn't necessarily mean it didn't happen. There just was no proof for it, and I'm not going to speculate further than that. It also came out during this trial that Veronica would leave the children in the care of their paternal great-grandmother, who made it a chore for Veronica's daughter, who was only 2 years old at the time, to go out and feed the turkeys and give them water. They had turkeys, and I've heard actually that turkeys can be pretty aggressive. I've had really no experiences with turkeys, but apparently these turkeys would peck at the little girl and leave marks on her body. Veronica also admitted to an incident where her son was bitten in the face by a dog. and that she didn't seek any medical care for him, and also didn't verify whether or not the dog had all of its shots. Lastly, and this one is truly upsetting, so I want to issue a trigger warning here. We're going to be talking about SA just briefly, but yeah, it's tough to hear. There are accusations, I want to make it clear, these are accusations that Veronica's brother was sexually abusing the children and that she continued to let him be around them. So based on all of this, Wrangler ended up being granted full custody, and Veronica could only see the kids once a week on Saturdays in supervised visits. So obviously these things are terribly upsetting, and some of them are accusations, but some of them are things that Veronica admitted to. So I felt it was important to share that information with you all. However, once again, she certainly did not deserve to be murdered. And again, I want to point out that it has been reported that Veronica had started to turn her life around the time that she was murdered. At that time, she was holding a steady job, she was going to school, and making the time that she spent with her children positive and productive. And one of the people who she said she really looked up to during this time was our second victim in this case, Jilian Kelley, who I will be telling you more about here in a minute. But before I talk about Jilian, I want to tell you a little bit more about Wrangler, the children's father, who definitely is not free of wrongdoing at all. Wrangler is said to have been extremely toxic and abusive, not just to Veronica, but to another woman that he dated after he and Veronica split. And it got so bad that this other woman ended up pressing charges against him for domestic violence. And that wasn't his only run-in with the law. In early 2024, right before the murders, he had been ordered to complete a 6-month inpatient drug and alcohol rehab after he was released from jail for possession of a firearm after a felony conviction, which obviously meant that he wasn't looking after the kids. And I just have to say, before moving any further, I feel so badly for these children. I mean, they have been through a lot in their young lives, especially after what has unfolded recently and what is going to continue to unfold here. It just breaks my heart. So like I said, he clearly wasn't looking after the kids, so who was? Well, that would be their grandmother, Wrangler's mother, Tiffany Adams. Now, let me just tell you that this woman is truly evil. Honestly, evil doesn't even really cut it when it comes to describing this woman. She is, God, there just aren't words. Veronica was truly terrified of her, and Tiffany definitely made it as hard as she could for Veronica to visit with her children, which is just one of the reasons that Veronica was petitioning the courts for increased visitation. And the thing is, she was close to getting that increase in visitation around the time that she was murdered. But like I already explained, at this point in time when Veronica was murdered, she was only granted those once-a-week supervised visits on Saturdays. Now, who was the supervisor for these visits? That brings us to our next victim, Jilian Kelley. Jilian Kelley was a 39-year-old mother of 4 who was born on June 3rd, 1984 to her parents Theodore Joe and Callie Ann. She was originally from Nebraska, which is where she married her husband Heath in October of 2002. And I think the best word that I've seen used to describe Jilian is devoted. She was devoted to her faith, she was devoted to her children, devoted to her husband, and also very devoted to her community. As the wife of a pastor, Jilian's faith was at the forefront of everything that she did, and it was a major part of her identity. She was not only the secretary at her local church, but also guided several youth groups and was seen as a pillar of her community. Outside of the church, she loved to travel, ride her motorcycle, attend sporting events for her kids, and cheer on the Nebraska Cornhuskers. It seems doing things for others really just came natural to Jilian, and it makes me truly heartbroken and sick to my stomach that her life was taken from her in such a heinous, unnecessary, and unfair way. And you're probably wondering how Jilian ended up wrapped up in all of this. Well, to fully understand the context, we need to go over the custody situation once again leading up to the murders. Like we already know, the kids were in their parental grandmother's care, which is Tifany, and they had been for quite some time. And like we also know, Tifany was making it really hard for Veronica to see the kids. But it wasn't just Veronica's life that she was making miserable, it was also her son Wrangler's. It's been reported that Tifany threatened to shoot him in the head if he didn't do what she wanted him to do, and at certain times she just outright refused to let him see his children. And there are a lot of people who claim that Tifany was just a pretty brutal person all around, that She oftentimes fought with other people, that she, just wasn't too pleasant. And neither was her boyfriend, who I will get to later. But if you couldn't already tell, Tiffany wanted it to be her way or no way at all. And her way was having the kids all to herself. And so in the months leading up to the murders, Tiffany and Veronica were in their own custody dispute. Veronica and her attorney were fighting for unsupervised visits and increased visitation as well, and they were close to getting that. In mid-March, they had filed a petition, and her lawyer says that they were most likely going to be granted that during their upcoming hearing on April 17th. But that hearing never happened, because just 10 days after filing it, Veronica Butler and Jilian Kelley were abducted and killed in broad daylight. So let me explain, as best as I can with the information we have at this point, how that all unfolded. March 30th, 2024, which was supposed to be like any other normal Saturday. Veronica was supposed to see the kids that day, pick them up for her scheduled supervised visitation, and she was planning to take them to a family birthday party that day. So she and Jilian were going to drive from Hugoton, Kansas, where they were living, to Eva, Oklahoma, which is where the exchange point was for picking up the kids. Now, I want to be super clear here because this is a little bit confusing, but Jilian was not the usual supervisor for these visits. She was just doing it on this particular Saturday. The person who usually supervised these visits is a woman named Cheryl Brune, and she was specifically someone that Tiffany had selected to be the supervisor. And I didn't know you could actually choose someone to be the supervisor. I don't know if that's the same in every state, but from my understanding, she was able to do this by paying the court a certain amount of money, I'm not sure how much, to essentially pick the person who she wanted to supervise the visits. So anyway, Cheryl was the primary supervisor most of the time, but she wasn't the supervisor on that Saturday, March 30th. And I'll definitely explain this a little bit more later, but because Cheryl was unavailable that day, Veronica was able to pick someone else who she wanted to supervise the visit. And that person was Jilian. She was one of 3 people who was approved to supervise, and there's some question over how close the 2 of them really were, but police have described them as being more acquaintances than friends. Anyways, though, that morning, the 30th, everything seemed completely normal. Veronica picked up Jilian and they headed to their pickup spot. Specifically, they were going to an abandoned gas station in a place called Four Corners, which was about a 45-minute drive away, which, just for reference, this was in the Oklahoma Panhandle, so it's a super rural area. I'm talking miles and miles of farmland where you could drive for a while without running into anyone. Now, the plan was to pick up the kids at 10 a.m. and then head to this family birthday party. However, they never showed up, and members of Veronica's family knew that something was wrong right away. So they jumped right into action to look for her, and only a few hours later, they located her car just west of Highway 95 and County Road L. The car had not made it to their final destination, but instead was abandoned on a dirt road just a few miles away. And knowing what we know now, I can't imagine how horrified her family was when they found this car. At 12:09 p.m., they called local law enforcement to report Veronica and Jilian missing, as well as the fact that they'd found Veronica's car. And from that point forward, an all-hands-on-deck investigation began. And by this point, Jilian's husband and Veronica's fiance had become worried as well, and they also reported them as missing to law enforcement. Now, when the police arrived at the location of the abandoned car, it was immediately clear that they would need the help of the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. There was absolutely no denying that very serious injuries occurred there. And of course, the OSBI had the resources to process and investigate what appeared to be the scene of a double homicide. And I'm sure we all have our true crime brains on right now, and you could probably guess what investigators turned to when trying to figure out what happened here. The custody battle. Obviously, when someone goes missing, investigators are going to look at what was going on in their life at the time that they went missing. And I'm sure most of you know that when a violent crime occurs, most of the time it is perpetrated by someone who the victim knew. So in this case, what is the biggest thing going on in Veronica's life at the time that she goes missing? The custody battle. So I'm sure it'll shock none of you to hear that the first person they turned to was Tiffany. After all, Tiffany was supposed to be meeting up with Veronica and Jilian that morning, but according to her story, they actually weren't planning to meet. According to Tiffany, she said that she called Veronica at 9 a.m. to confirm the drop-off, but Veronica ended up canceling last minute. And just quickly, that statement couldn't be true for two reasons. One, we know from cell records that Veronica was actually on the way to pick up Jilian when Tiffany called her. So if she did cancel, why would she then go and pick up Jilian anyway? And second of all, the spot where the car was found abandoned was only a few miles away from the pickup location. If plans had really changed, like Tiffany claimed, why would she continue to pick up Jilian and then drive 45 minutes in the direction of the pickup location? Doesn't really add up, right? And then there's this. And I know I already explained to you guys that Jilian was just filling in for Cheryl, who ended up not being able to supervise the visit that day. Well, according to Tiffany, that's because Cheryl was out of town that weekend. And she made it sound like it was just completely random that she happened to be gone. Here's the thing, though. Investigators ended up finding out that the real reason Cheryl wasn't there that day is because Tiffany had called her up and told her she should take a few weeks off. And keep in mind, Cheryl was the person that Tiffany had selected to be the supervisor. So, of course, she wanted to protect her. I'm not sure the extent of their relationship or whatever. She clearly liked her if she chose her for this position. But she told her, take some time off, and it's clear why she did that. So not suspicious at all, right? And apparently, Tiffany told Cheryl that she, as in Tiffany herself, was going to supervise this visit to see how Veronica acted around the children. And she actually was an approved supervisor. So at the time, Cheryl didn't question it, but looking back now, it's very suspicious that she tells Cheryl to take this time off. And believe me, the evidence and suspicious behavior doesn't stop there, not even close. And in my opinion, there's a lot of good circumstantial evidence against Tiffany and her co-conspirators, who I haven't even gotten to yet, but certainly will. But in all honesty, that information was held super close to the vest in the first couple of weeks. Between March 30th, when they went missing, and mid-April, when their bodies were found, which I will get to, the public was left pretty much in the dark when it came to this investigation. All anyone knew is that there were two missing moms, and truthfully, not much else. In fact, many people were quite infuriated with the police, which often happens when there's a lack of information. You know, people feel like nothing is being done. But come to find out, they were doing a lot, and they knew exactly who they thought did this. However, they needed to gather enough evidence to prove it, and that's what they were doing in the meantime. And of course, this can be incredibly frustrating for the public and especially frustrating for the families, but maintaining the integrity of the investigation is and was absolutely crucial. And luckily, it paid off, because on April 13th, 2024, it was announced that 4 people, that's right, 4 people were arrested in connection with the disappearance and murders of Veronica Butler and Jilian Kelley. And these 4 people are, of course, 54-year-old Tiffany Adams, 43-year-old Tad Cullum, who had a rifle, ammunition, and a go bag on him, 50-year-old Cole Twombly, and 44-year-old Cora Twombly.
Welcome back, everyone. New this morning, multiple arrests have been made involving the 2 women who disappeared in Oklahoma 2 weeks ago. Nancy Liu joining us from Hugoton, Kansas with the latest. Good morning, Nancy.
Good morning, Hannah. It's sure to be an emotional Sunday service here at First Christian Church in Hugoton. This is where the husband of Jilian Kelley is the lead pastor. The entire community now is grieving following 2 weeks of hope that Kelley and Veronica Butler would be found safe. Well, the 4 under arrest for first-degree murder and other felony charges: 54-year-old Tiffany Adams, her boyfriend Tad Cullum, and Cole and Cora Twombly. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigations is not revealing details about the suspects' alleged crimes or what happened, but a custody fight may be linked to it all.
All 4 of them were charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of kidnapping, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. And even though they didn't announce the discovery of any bodies right then, this announcement unfortunately confirmed the absolute worst-case scenario, which is that investigators did not believe the women were alive. And this ended up being confirmed just a day later, on the 14th, when it was announced that 2 bodies had been found.
We do have breaking news to get to right now. Just coming into our newsroom, a sad ending. The bodies believed to be the 2 Kansas moms found by police in Oklahoma. This information just coming in right now. 27-year-old Veronica Butler and 39-year-old Jilian Kelley, last seen March 30th. Tiffany Adams, a grandmother of one of the kids, one of the people now arrested after Butler and Kelley disappeared. Let's get straight to News Nation's Nancy Liu live on the ground for us tonight. Nancy, tell us what you're learning now.
Well, Natasha, it's yet more deflating news for these communities in the Oklahoma Panhandle. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigations had told me that they were searching vast areas of rural Texas County for the 2 women. And just minutes ago, we heard from OSBI that along with the FBI and the Texas County Sheriff's Department in a joint operation, they have recovered 2 deceased persons in rural Texas County, and both individuals are being transported to the Oklahoma Office of the Chief Medical Examiner to determine identification and cause of manner of death. So that means there is no positive identification that these bodies are Jilian Kelley and Veronica Butler. But of course, this discovery happened during their massive search for the 2 women.
Now, like you just heard, it wasn't announced at the time that these 2 bodies belonged to Veronica and Jilian, but I mean, to everyone, it was pretty obvious. And this discovery came after 2 days of searching and excavating a property in Texas County, Oklahoma, following the execution of a search warrant. And this is really disturbing and breaks my heart to say, but the 2 bodies were found buried 10 feet deep in a cow pasture inside of a chest freezer. But what we still don't know at this point in time is how they were killed. It has been almost 3 months since Jilian and Veronica were found, and a cause of death has still not been made public. And I just have to hope that there is a good reason for that. I assume that there is a good reason for that. Of course, people really want to know the answer for this, and many people have speculated as to what happened, but we just don't actually know, and may not for a while. However, there is still a lot of other information and evidence that has been shared, so let's go over that now. First of all, on April 15th, the arrest affidavit was made public, and almost everything you need to know about this case can be found in these documents. And when it was finally made public, it was a big deal because it was the first time people got a glimpse into what evidence led to them arresting 4 people in connection with these murders. And for starters, it outlined the custody battle, which, as I have already mentioned, investigators believe was the motive for these murders. As I said earlier, 10 days before the murders, Veronica and her attorney filed a petition for increased visitation rights and that she was likely going to be granted it. And well, in the eyes of investigators, and I'd say in the eyes of most, it certainly doesn't feel like a coincidence that less than 2 weeks later, Veronica was killed. And truthfully, even beyond that petition being filed, we know that Tiffany and the others were planning on killing her, hence the conspiracy to commit murder charges. According to the affidavit, Tiffany and the others attempted to murder Veronica back in February, but the attempt failed because Veronica refused to leave her house. And believe it or not, this information actually came directly from a witness. It turns out that Cora and Cole Twombly, which I know we haven't talked about much yet, were freely talking about what they were planning to do in front of their 16-year-old daughter. Yeah, well, technically Cole was her stepfather, but you know what I mean. These idiots practically hid nothing from her, and she spilled everything when she was interviewed by investigators on April 3rd, starting with how the defendants knew each other, which I'm sure by this point you were all wondering how the hell 4 people were involved in these murders and who they are, so let me explain. Well, for starters, there's actually 5 people involved in this. However, at this point in the timeline, only 4 had been arrested, so let's just stick to them for now. We all know Tiffany at this point, right? She's the paternal grandmother and pretty unhinged person from what we understand, so nothing new to add there. Then we have Tad Cullum, who is actually Tiffany's boyfriend, who I briefly mentioned earlier. Now, they were living in a very rural area in the Oklahoma Panhandle and are apparently said to have a lot of money and influence in their community. In fact, one of Tad's closest buds is a local municipal judge, which tells you a whole lot. And get this, guys, Brian Enton actually interviewed him after the arrest, and he talked about how Tad isn't at all the guy that people are making him out to be. Now, personally, I'm all aboard the Tad is a piece of shit train, but that's not why I'm telling you about this interview. I'm telling you about it because after the interview, the mayor was so pissed at the judge for speaking out that he actually fired him. Here's a clip from the interview.
When's the last time you saw Tad?
I was there when they raided it.
You were there.
Tad and I have been working together the last month in a business, and I was down there when it was raided.
What was that like?
Being with a military past in Vietnam, it brought back some really bad memories. Looking down the barrel of those rifles, it was very hard for me. It brought back a lot of memories, a lot of bad things.
Did you ever get a bad vibe from Tad?
No. Tad was one of the nicest, funniest. I seen him almost on a daily basis this last month. We were working together. I couldn't even believe he was involved in it.
What about Tiffany?
I didn't see her a lot. I've known her for years. Always thought she was just a little bit out in left field. But again, just never believed that they would do this kind of thing.
And I think this is a good example why people in Texas County are so scared to speak up. I'm going to be telling you more about Cora's daughter and what she knew about the murders, and I know people are going to question why she didn't come forward sooner. But if this example of the mayor firing the judge tells you anything, it shows you that there are repercussions for speaking up. Plus, considering who this poor girl's parents are and what they're capable of, I don't blame her at all for being hesitant to speak up, and I'm glad that she was brave enough to eventually do so. But putting that aside, what is the common denominator here? How are these people connected? Well, according to their daughter, who is referred to as CW in the affidavit, the four suspects are part of an anti-government, religiously affiliated group called God's Misfits. And from what's being reported, these four essentially believed that they do not have to abide by U.S. law. And some of them, I guess, have renounced their citizenship, which apparently is a thing that people do. I didn't know about that. I don't know if you guys have heard the term sovereign citizen. That's what came to mind when I started looking into these people. I'm not sure if they consider themselves to be sovereign citizens, but sovereign citizens are essentially people who don't believe that they have to abide by the law. They think they are exempt from U.S. laws. Like, I've watched clips where officers will pull over a sovereign citizen and they will literally tell them, I'm a sovereign citizen, you can't do anything. Like, tough titties. I don't know. It's honestly something I want to learn more about because I think it's quite interesting. But at this point, we don't actually know if these four were like official members of God's Misfits, because the founder of the God's Misfits did an interview with the News Nation. His name is Squirrel. Yeah. But anyway, Squirrel came out and stated that they don't even have a chapter of the God's Misfits in the Oklahoma Panhandle. And homeboy Squirrel says he doesn't even know these people, hadn't heard of these people. And what they believed is not what God's Misfits is even about. So let's just hear directly from Squirrel himself.
Your reaction to hearing that 4 people were arrested in a horrific double murder who police say are members of God's Misfits, and police describe that group as an anti-government and religious group. What are your thoughts?
My thought is his God is not my God. He's serving a different God, because the God that I serve condemns such hate and such actions. So I don't know what God he's serving. He's serving himself. He's serving Satan. He's definitely not serving the God I serve.
Is there any part of your ministry or your members that is anti-government?
No, it's just me and my wife. No, we're not anti-government at all. We vote. I have 3 ways. I can pray, I can fast, and I can vote.
So based on that interview, I'm curious about what you guys think when it comes to God's Misfits. I mean, a cult never describes themselves as a cult, of course. Squirrel seems to think that it's a ministry. But yeah, he doesn't think that whatever these people were part of had anything to do with God's misfits. And I'm sure some of you might think that maybe Squirrel is trying to distance himself from this situation. Maybe he is involved with these people. Who really knows? At this point, of course, like I keep saying, there's just so much we don't know. But one thing we do know is that investigators don't seem to think, in fact, they've made it quite clear that this cult or God's misfits group has really nothing to do with these murders, if that makes sense. Like, yes, these four claim that they are part of God's misfits, but the cult itself, if it is a cult, has nothing to do with the murders actually taking place. Like, it wasn't a ritual part of the cult or something that the rest of the people that are part of this had anything to do with. Bottom line is they believe the custody battle is the motive for the murders, and it just so happened that these four also claim to be part of God's misfits. So on the other hand, though, I do understand that you could definitely make the argument that maybe some of the teachings from this cult that they claim to be part of, even though Squirrel says they're not, like, influence them to do this. But yeah, we just don't know enough about that to really say if that's the case. Anyway, though, let's go back to what we do know in the affidavit, because we still have a lot to go over. As I was saying before, Cora and Cole's daughter, CW, was the one who told investigators a bunch of incriminating things. And another thing that she talked about with investigators was that failed first attempt back in February. And guys, get this. The original plan was for them to throw an anvil through her windshield while she was driving. And if you don't know what an anvil is, because I actually didn't know, I guess it's a giant block of steel that is used in metalworking. And apparently, according to this group of Nimrods, anvils oftentimes fall off trucks. It's a very common thing to happen, so it would look like an accident. Now, clearly, I don't live in Oklahoma, and I don't know much about anvils. But from the reporting I have seen on this case from people who know better than me, anvils do not often fall off of trucks. I've even seen clips of people who would know laughing about that claim, basically saying that's something that only really happens in cartoons. But like I explained earlier, that attempt didn't happen because Veronica refused to leave her house, which coincides with the online searches that Tiffany was making around this time. So let's get into that. Tiffany searched for things on her phone, like taser pain level, gun shops, prepaid cell phones, and lastly, how to get someone out of their house. Yeah. And obviously, that says a whole lot, but it doesn't stop there. By far, one of the most incriminating things that CW told investigators was that the night before the victims disappeared, her parents told her they wouldn't see her when she woke up because they were going on a, quote, mission. And I think the fact that they use the term mission really says a lot about the mindset of these people. But then, according to CW, when they got home, they asked her, their 16-year-old daughter, to clean out their truck. And that's not all. According to CW, they also told her that things, quote, didn't go as planned, but that they wouldn't have to worry about Veronica anymore. Oh, and listen to this. Cora straight up told her daughter that she and Cole blocked off the road that the victims were driving on in order to divert them down a different road. And that road was where Veronica's car was found. So she literally admitted to creating the diversion that ultimately led to the ambush and murders. She also told her daughter that Jilian had to die too because she, quote, supported Veronica. And when I first heard that detail, God, I've got to tell you, I was sick to my stomach. Obviously, neither of these women deserved the pain and suffering that they experienced, but especially Jilian to have just been in the wrong place at the wrong time is so beyond sad. And the fact that it was all over a custody dispute is just, God, it's heartbreaking. And clearly none of us think these suspects are smart in any way, but really, what were they thinking was going to happen? Obviously, the investigators were going to look into these victims' lives, and obviously, they were going to find out about the custody dispute and who was involved. And what? The investigators were just going to take their word for it that they were at home and had nothing to do with it and move on? Okay. And I mean, it was just so obvious when they started looking into things that Tifany was the one who orchestrated it all. The others were equally as culpable, but who had the most to gain here? Tifany. Turns out she even sent the kids to stay at another person's house, the Cook family, the night before, and she didn't pick them up until the afternoon of the 30th. So it's not like they could have even corroborated her alibi. Plus, another thing I just wanted to point out, and of course, everyone is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, but I think this is interesting to note. The Cook family is also connected to the God's Misfits. But getting back to the affidavit, we learned that CW asked her mom if the bodies were put in a well, and Cora's response was something like that. And as I already explained, their bodies were buried 10 feet deep in a pasture in a chest freezer. And if all of that wasn't convincing enough, which I feel like it definitely is, CW said that she overheard a group conversation between the suspects where they explicitly mentioned being involved in the murders. Lastly, and this is also very important, she confirmed to investigators that her parents and the rest of the members of the group were using burner phones to communicate. Which brings me to the next chunk of evidence, the burner phones, which the burner phones ended up being highly incriminating, which is ironic considering burner phones are normally used to cover your tracks. Not so much for these four. It turns out that the OSBI investigators traced the purchase of 3 prepaid burner phones back to Tiffany, who bought them on February 13th at a Walmart in Oklahoma. She also bought 5 stun guns on March 23rd, which, as we know, corresponds to 2 of the searches she made on her phone. And as you could probably guess, investigators also got search warrants for the information related to these phones, and boy, was it damning. Not only did the data further prove that the suspects were the ones using them, but it also led investigators right to where the victims were buried. So let me explain what I mean by that. When these burner phones were first powered on, it shows that they were at or near Tad Cullum's house. The data then shows that on the morning of March 30th, all 3 phones pinged at the location where Veronica's car was abandoned, which literally puts them at the crime scene. Brilliant, you guys. And next, between 10:16 and 10:32 a.m., 2 of the phones pinged at a property owned by a guy named Jamie Beasley. And this property is ultimately where the bodies were found, specifically below a dam in the pasture where investigators found dirt that looked like it had been recently disturbed.
It's dark out here, so bear with me, but this is the area where the missing women were found. This is the spot. You remember in the police report, they mentioned a dam. This right here, this buildup of dirt, this is the dam. There's a pond on the other side. And if you walk with me this way, just about 50 feet or so, maybe a little more from the dam, you can see where the earth is disturbed, where the tractors were out here. This is where investigators came. They dug right in this area, went down about 10 feet, I'm told. And this is where they discovered the missing moms' bodies. If you look in the distance there, you can see there is a pile of hay back there. I am told by sources that hay was moved over the area where the digging happened, that Tad, the suspect Tad, moved that hay over here to cover up the area where he was digging, hoping that the cows, this is there's a cow farm here, that the cows would come over, this is a ranch, and start feeding on the hay and make the area look less suspicious. But still, investigators were led to this spot. And again, this is the area right here where they started digging and they found the bodies.
I know this has been a lot, but there's still a bit more to go over, so stick with me. So way earlier in this episode, I mentioned that as soon as law enforcement responded to the call about the missing women and the abandoned car, they called in the OSBI for help. And I said that because the scene clearly indicated that very serious injuries occurred there. But what I didn't mention is what it looked like. Well, according to the affidavit, they discovered pools of blood on the roadway and the edge of the roadway, as well as Veronica's glasses in the roadway south of the vehicle near a broken hammer. And just to be clear, I know it has been reported incorrectly, easy to mix up, but the glasses, as far as we know, were not broken. The hammer was broken. They also found Jilian's purse, and in her purse was a pistol magazine loader, but the pistol she was known to carry was gone. And then obviously both women and their phones as well were missing. The scene is said to have been extremely disturbing, and from the details I just went over, I mean, it's clear that something truly horrific happened there. And you can't forget that Veronica's family were the ones who came across her abandoned vehicle. They found that scene, which is just unimaginable, dude. I don't even have words for what it would be like to come across that. Another big thing that we learned from the affidavit is that the pasture where the bodies were found wasn't just a completely random pasture. It turns out that Tad Cullum, Tiffany's boyfriend, was leasing out this pasture for his cattle from a guy named Jamie Beasley. And a day or two before March 30th, Tad asked Jamie if he could use his skid steer to do some, quote, dirt work. Specifically, he mentioned something about removing a stump and burying concrete. Well, Jamie said sure, and essentially gave Tad the green light to dig that massive 10-foot hole. What's wild, though, is after the news started to break about the two missing mothers, Tad actually went to Jamie and said, look, dude, kind of inconvenient here, but the police may come by here because there's some talk of me being connected to this. And his concern was that the police would see the tractor marks he left behind on the property and think that it somehow had something to do with the missing women, which, as we know, it did have something to do with the missing women, but Jamie didn't know this. So he basically told Tad that he would cover for him if the police came by and asked about it. But many people question Jamie. And one of the main reasons for that is because a source actually told News Nation that when Tad came and talked to Jamie, he had these moon-shaped scratches on his face, like in the shape of fingernails. So it's a little sketch to me that Tad came to him with these scratches on his face and was like, hey, dude, they think I might be involved in this. If police come, you got to cover for me. And he was like, bro, I got you. I don't know. It's weird. But of course, we have to remember that Tad, is said to have had a lot of influence in the area, that people were afraid of him, that he had a lot of money and whatever. And so maybe Jamie was just nervous. Maybe he truly just didn't know. I've got to say, though, he has been 100% cleared by law enforcement at this point in time. And apparently he was even crying when police came and talked to him. So there's that. But yeah, it's just one of those situations where you wish someone felt comfortable coming forward sooner. Regardless, though, there's still plenty of other evidence that point at these four suspects. And mind you, Tiffany ended up admitting to her role in all of this after her arrest. So it's not even like she was denying it.
Prosecutors say Tiffany Adams, the prime suspect in the murders of Veronica Butler and Jilian Kelley, gave a recorded statement after she was arrested. KOCO's Jason Berger got a hold of those documents and is live now. So Jason, walk us through what you learned.
Yeah, guys, this is a motion to hold Adams without bail, and it says she told investigators she was responsible for the deaths of Veronica and Jilian.
What's interesting, though, and frustrating is that despite her admission, she and the other four suspects pled not guilty. On April 17th, the judge entered a not guilty plea for all four suspects, and all four were denied bond. The family members of the victims were present at this hearing, and as you can imagine, emotions and tensions were high.
We weren't allowed to have our cameras or phones inside the courthouse. I want you to look at this video. You can see all of the suspects being brought out of the courthouse and put into police cars one by one and taken back to the jail. Bond was denied for all four suspects, and they all, but one, said that they had the money to afford a private attorney, but none of them had found an attorney at this point. It was very, very emotional, Marnie. I don't think I've ever been in a court hearing quite like it, because it was a very, very small courtroom, and you had the victims' family members take up 3 of the rows of the courtroom. And some of them actually had to be physically held back during the hearing. They were sobbing and trying to lunge at the suspects as they were brought in, and other family members had to hold them back. And then they were actually saying things to the suspects during the hearing. They weren't actually shouting, but you could hear exactly what they were saying. They called Grandma Tiffany Adams, who, of course, is believed to be the orchestrator of these murders. They called her an effing bee. They called the other man a bastard, and a lot of expletives, a sorry ass piece of S word, which was just interesting to hear in a courtroom as the defendants were brought in. Obviously, they're very, very emotional about what happened. I would say about maybe 24 family members inside the courtroom as the hearing went on. But again, the headline here: bond denied, and they will be back in court sometime next month, Marty.
Then let's talk about the 5th suspect that I mentioned earlier, who was arrested on April 24th. 31-year-old Paul Grice was arrested in connection to the kidnapping and murders of Veronica and Jilian, and he was also charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of kidnapping, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. And for some reason, even though he was questioned when the others were questioned, investigators ended up releasing him. But this dumbass ended up talking to someone after that and asked, how long does DNA stay on clothes in the dirt? Not only that, he also asked how to get someone to Mexico. So at that point, the police, once this witness came forward and told them all of this, were like, okay, dude, we got you too. And according to his arrest affidavit, he also admitted to being part of it. The planning, the killing, the burying, all of it. So out of these 5, 2 have admitted responsibility. And it makes me wonder if there's going to be a plea agreement for any of them. Obviously, not a single one of them deserves a lighter sentence, but I definitely wonder if someone will end up pleading guilty for some kind of deal. But to change gears a little bit here, during all of this chaos, a celebration of life ceremony was held for Jilian on April 28th, and it was, understandably, a very emotional day. Loved ones gathered as they heard from her husband and kids, who spoke of how incredible she was and all the ways that they will miss her.
A church clad in yellow, a symbol of light.
We're not here to celebrate death. We're here to celebrate life.
That was the scene at Hugoton First Christian Church for Jilian Kelley's celebration of life.
There's nothing worth more.
It included remarks from her husband.
She pretty much taught me how to be a dad. Because of her, I learned how to be a good husband, a better friend, a better minister. She was a helper.
As well as her children.
Mom left behind an amazing legacy. She left a piece of her in each and every one of us.
They talked about the love she had for everyone she was close to.
She loved every minute with her kids. With me, with all of you.
And all the things they loved doing together.
We will miss having coffee with her, going on hikes, going to the zoo, living life.
And the big message of the day was that Jilian wouldn't have wanted the focus to be on her.
I can hear Jilian saying, you don't need to focus on me. She would be a little embarrassed. This much attention given to her. Because she wanted to focus on Jesus.
And on May 3rd, Veronica's loved ones gathered to do the same.
Family and friends today honor the life of Veronica Butler, one of 2 Hugoton mothers who went missing and later found murdered. Veronica is remembered as someone warm and generous and for her comforting presence.
Now, in between when both of these services happened, some pretty disturbing footage came out of Tifany. Now, it's not graphic or hard to watch. It's just eerie. For those of you who are listening to this episode and not watching, it's a video of Tifany with the 2 children at a self-checkout station. It appears they're buying some type of Easter basket, maybe some other groceries, but what really makes this so eerie is that this was taken 4 days after the murder. And here she is, seemingly unfazed by what she's done.
It's Grandma Tifany with Veronica Butler's 2 young children. These are the 2 young children who allegedly and certainly unknowingly are at the center of this whole sordid murder plot. This video was taken by a checkout camera at a local store after Veronica and her child visitation supervisor, Jilian Kelley, were ambushed and violently murdered roadside. The video was taken just 4 days after that horrifying scene in rural Oklahoma. Grandma Tifany and the kids just out running errands, which may not seem like a big deal. But as you watch this, keep in mind the mother of these 2 young kids is buried 10 feet deep in a cow pasture. And they will never see her again, and they have absolutely no idea.
And I also want to just point out, because it's pretty ironic to me, pretty interesting, that she's wearing a shirt that says, Jesus is my savior. And then I think the bottom says something like, Trump is my, I'm guessing, president. Not that that matters. That's not really what bothers me or what I find to be so interesting. It's the fact that people like this could wear a shirt that says, Jesus is my savior. Now, obviously, I have said many times I'm not religious myself, but I do know that Jesus is not down with murder. And for people who are so afraid of Judgment Day, God-fearing, Judgment Day is not going to be so good for you when you have to explain why you murdered 2 innocent mothers. And I know it's really frustrating to my Christian audience when people who claim to be Christians do things like this. I mean, you are not a real Christian in the way that you are supposed to be, right? Well, either way, whether or not they actually do face Judgment Day on the other side, they certainly are going to be facing Judgment Day here on Earth pretty soon. So then about 2 weeks after that, on May 15th, the suspects appeared in court for a status hearing, and during this hearing, the judge ordered a motion to withhold the full medical examiner's report for 6 months. Hence why we still don't know the victim's cause of death. That being said, I did hear that a summary of the report should be available sometime soon. Not totally sure on that, but also a gag order has been issued in this hearing. And considering the attention this case has gotten, that really doesn't surprise me at all. Lastly, the judge denied a motion to seal the search warrants in this case, meaning that the evidence that was uncovered during the execution of the search warrant has been made public. And that brings me back to James Beasley's property where the bodies were found. So a search of that property began on April 12th, and I'm going to list off some of the things that they found. First of all, Wrangler blue jeans with black belt with possible blood, brown sweatshirt with possible blood, black hooded sweatshirt with possible blood, black K-bar knife in sheath with possible blood, gray ball cap with possible blood, pair of cloth gloves with possible blood, black taser/flashlight, electrical cord, and small black tape. Now, like I said, this is just a partial list, but it gives you a pretty good sense of what was uncovered. Now, it hasn't been said who these items belong to, but I think we can all use our common sense here that clearly the suspects attempted to bury their bloody clothes and some of these other items that they used with the victims to conceal the evidence. And while we're speaking of search warrants, there are a few others that were issued as well. One was issued for each of the suspects to obtain DNA swabs from all of them, and another was issued for several of their vehicles. And from these warrants, we also learned that one thing investigators are looking for is kitty litter, because apparently there was kitty litter found at the crime scene itself that was probably used to try and soak up some of the blood. Search warrants for the vehicles also indicate that investigators haven't found the victims' personal items, which were not found in the hole that they were buried in. And I mean, considering the bodies had to have been transported somehow, I'm guessing there's probably DNA evidence in at least one of these vehicles as well. Possibly it could be Cora and Cole's truck, considering they had their 16-year-old daughter clean it out when they got home from committing these murders. Or based on what I'm about to tell you, maybe it was Tiffany's car. On the morning of March 30th, before investigators even arrived at the scene, someone drove by the abandoned vehicle and thought to themselves, maybe this person needs help. But just down the road, they saw a white car and a white trailer, and they figured those people were probably already helping them. And you want to guess who has a white car and a white trailer? That's right, Tiffany. And guess whose white trailer mysteriously ended up at Cole Twombly's relative's house? Tiffany's. And if we take everything I just told you guys into account, it sounds like the prosecution has quite the arsenal to try to get 5 solid convictions. Given the current charges, all 5 suspects are facing 3 possible outcomes: life in prison without parole, and the death penalty. And considering what these 5 are accused of doing, I hope that no matter what sentence these 5 get, that they absolutely rot, and I mean rot, behind bars. The premeditation of all this just really speaks to their inhumanity and absolutely sickens me. Oh, and I just have to mention this as well. There's also some speculation that they considered killing the judge in this custody case. Allegedly, back in February of 2024, Wrangler Rickman told his grandma, aka Tiffany's mom, that they weren't going to have to worry much longer because Tiffany, quote, knew the path the judge walked to work, which is so unbelievably creepy. Wrangler also told her that they were going to, quote, take out Veronica at drop-off. So I don't know about you, but this sounds pretty premeditated to me. I mean, you don't just casually mention the way that the judge walks to work unless you're planning to do something, especially when you're these fucking people. And I'm sure by this point in the episode, at least half of you are screaming, what about Wrangler Rickman? Well, as it stands right now, Wrangler has not been arrested in connection with any of this. He was confirmed to be at a rehab facility when the victims were killed, and he completely denies ever having that conversation with his grandma. And so I would love to know what all of you guys think. Do you think he had any involvement in any of this? Possibly some of the early planning phases, even though he was in rehab when it happened? Or do you think he's an innocent bystander in all of this? I definitely want to hear your thoughts on that and on this whole mess of a case as well. So let me know. But before I wrap up today, I do want to let you guys know that there was a discovery hearing on June 19th. And honestly, nothing drastic came out of this hearing other than the fact that the defense feels that the prosecution isn't handing over all of the evidence. And honestly, I don't really have a lot of commentary on that at this point because we just don't know much about what they mean by that. But hopefully everything is handed over eventually, unless it already has all been handed over. But anyway, my brain is turning to mush at this point. This one was so confusing, so frustrating, so insane. But looking forward here, the next scheduled hearing is July 17th, so hopefully we'll get some more information then. But God, this case was truly a roller coaster ride, and considering how much evidence there is, even if it is circumstantial, I have to hope that it's going to end with these victims getting justice. Regardless of whether or not you believe in the death penalty, I think we can all agree that these 5 perpetrators should never see the outside of a prison cell again. And in honor of the victims and the fact that this case centers so strongly around children, I thought the best place to make my donation this week is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. There are 6 children who were victims in all of this, and sounds like their life leading up to it was anything but easy, and it's only getting harder now. It's hard to even, put into words how horrific it is for all of them. What they have to live through now, everything they'll find out as time goes on, is just something that no child should ever have to live with. And I know you guys are all probably wondering who is going to get custody of Veronica's children now, and honestly, that is not something I have the answer to. That information hasn't been made public, but I just hope that they're in good care and that they're with someone that can keep them safe and support them through this incredibly difficult time. Also, speaking of NCMEC, I just wanted to note really quickly that we have a few items available in our current NCMEC collection. It's all available at kendallray.shop. And as always, 100% of your purchase will be going directly to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So check that out. Again, that's kendallray.shop. Thank you for your support. Also, as a reminder, please check out our sponsor today, Trainwell, formerly Copilot. To get started, visit go.trainwell.net/KendallRay to get 14 days for free with your own personal trainer. But that is all for me today, you guys. Like I said earlier, I want to know your thoughts because I know you're going to have many. So let me know. I will be back next week, but until then, stay safe out there.